Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Low Carbon Technologies Pathways to Net Zero. My name is Haley DeShane, and I'm the events coordinator at Eco Canada. Before we get started today, I'd like to give a land acknowledgement. In the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, we honor and acknowledge the Mohkinstsis and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as the Stoney Nakoda and Tsuut'ina nations. As an organization based in Mohkinstsis, or Calgary, Alberta, we acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Districts 5 and 6, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We recognize all nations who live, work, and play on this land and honor and celebrate this territory. We acknowledge that our work and this virtual event span many Indigenous territories across Canada, and we are committing to learning from and supporting the diverse nations whose land we engage with. I also want to go over a few housekeeping items for today. So everyone is muted and their cameras are off. But if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring it. And if you have any technical issues, I'll do my best to help you. And if you have questions about the presentation or the topics we're talking about today, then we will have question breaks at the end of each section where we will answer these questions, as well as just normal breaks for you to grab water and go to the washroom and things like that. But yeah, I'm going to pass it off to our speaker, Andrew.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today to follow this course on low carbon technologies. Thank you very much for Eco Canada as well for putting this together. I'll get started with a little bit of an introduction of who I am and the company I work for as people are just trickling in. And then we'll jump over to just reviewing the agenda for today. I don't expect it to go all the way to 12:30, but we'll see how it goes. So, my name is Andrew Batula. I am the Manager of Sustainability and Business Development here at AET. I will be presenting this course for you today, but the course was prepared by my colleague, Catherine Rogg, who was not able to attend and to present today. So I just wanted to acknowledge her hard work on this presentation. AET was established in 1998 as a multidisciplinary environmental consulting auditing company providing professional services in sustainability, air, greenhouse gases, compliance, waste, building sciences, building certifications, and much more. It has a team of about 35 to 40 professionals between engineers and technician, and does work all the way throughout Canada, United States, Mexico, Europe, and the broader South America. AET delivers high-quality environmental consulting through this multidisciplinary approach that combines technical expertise, innovation, and integrity. With a proven track record of effective environmentally sound solutions, we empower organizations of all sizes to meet their sustainability goals. We specialize in GHG inventory development, management systems, project planning, and third-party verification for GHG emissions across various sectors, including multinational corporations. Our team offers deep expertise in key GHG standards, voluntary reporting programs like CDP and CSA Group, and regulatory compliance. We have currently completed our ISO 1465 accreditation. So that's a little bit about us. AET, feel free to reach out after this presentation if you are interested in some of the services that we offer. I'd be happy to connect. For today, gotten through the housekeeping and the team introductions, we're going to introduce the topics of low carbon technologies that you're going to see here, abbreviated to LCT. We're going to talk about Canada's net zero commitments, just broadly as an overview. Then we'll go through different low carbon technologies throughout the different sectors, what the journey is for Canada, and what kind of incentives and tax credits there are to help businesses that are looking to adopt some of these technologies. And then finally, we'll open up the floor to any questions or any comments that there might be. Okay, let's get started. So the course overview. Understand low carbon technologies is obviously the key to what we're doing today. The session will introduce you to the most impactful low carbon technologies across multiple sectors, and we'll review how they work, how their uptake is driven, and the challenges they face at reaching scale. We'll also look at some of the policy tools like investment tax credits, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, and some real world examples that have been brought to life just recently in the country. So, what is low carbon technology? Pardon me for that slide. It looks a little bit cut, but they are the potentials and opportunities towards low carbon technologies. Industrial energy consumption has risen considerably in the past 2 decades, increasing by an average of 1% between 2010 and 2019, along with demand for industrial products and CO2 emissions. According to the IEA Industrial Tracking Report of 2021, the net zero emission scenario, growth in energy use needs to be limited to about 0.9% per year to 2030, despite expected expansion in industrial production. Examples of LCT are manifold and include increase in utilization ratio of available resources, so electricity through use of heat pumps, combined heat and power, the decrease of primary demand for production factors like smart grids, adoption of smart grids within our distribution networks, intelligent and digitalized facility management, and make use of inevitable emissions. And so these are examples of carbon capture, storage, and utilization, or convert desired products from renewable resources, photovoltaic energy, geothermal heating, hydrogen. So in general, when we talk about low carbon technologies, we're really referring to technical solutions designed to produce the same or often better economic and social outcomes as traditional systems, but with a fraction of the carbon footprint. These technologies are defined by their low emission intensity, essentially how much carbon dioxide or equivalent greenhouse gases are emitted per unit of activity or output. They represent a deliberate and strategic shift away from fossil fuel dependency, introducing cleaner, smarter, and more sustainable alternatives across all sectors. Globally, Europe and North America have emerged as frontrunners in this transition. These regions hold the largest market share of no carbon emission technologies, meaning systems and processes that generate negligible or zero carbon output. Think of them as the cornerstone of industrial modernization, simultaneously reducing emissions while driving innovation, competitiveness, and energy resilience. Some of these things obviously may change as political whims may shift over the course of the years, but it still holds relatively true. Now, to understand why these technologies are crucial, we need to consider the broader industrial energy landscape. Over the last 2 decades, industrial energy consumption has steadily been increasing, as we discussed, and it's largely growing as demand for manufactured goods and materials has grown. The Industrial Energy Agency, as we discussed in 2021, estimates that this trajectory will continue and far surpass the 0.9% mark that we discussed. In other words, industries need to grow smarter, not dirtier, if we are due to hit the targets discussed. Pardon me. That's where low carbon technologies step in. They offer a suite of innovations capable of transforming how industries operate from the factory floor to the power grid. And the examples are multiple: increased utilization of available resources, reduced primary demand, making use of inevitable emissions like we discussed, and substituting fossil fuel-based inputs with renewables. Ultimately, low carbon technologies aren't just tools, they're enablers of a broader paradigm shift. They allow industries to decouple growth from emissions, align with global net zero ambitions, and future-proof their operations against tightening regulations and volatile energy markets. LCTs not only address environmental objectives, but they also generate significant social and economic benefits. By supporting local manufacturing, installation, and maintenance of clean energy systems, LCTs create employment opportunities and stimulate economic activity within communities. These local jobs contribute to broader social benefits, including skills development, increased economic resilience. Energy is a fundamental driver of economic growth, and simply reducing consumption is not a viable solution. LCTs provide a pathway to meet essential energy demands while simultaneously lowering greenhouse gas emissions. By integrating cleaner technologies into energy systems, societies can continue to develop economically without exacerbating climate impacts. In addition to environmental and economic benefits, LCTs enhance energy security by diversifying energy sources and reducing dependence on imported fuels. This strengthens national and local resilience, stabilizes energy costs, and ensures more reliable access to energy. Combined with their capacity to create jobs and foster community development, LCTs represent a multifaceted approach. Combined with their capacity to create jobs and foster community development, LCTs represent a multifaceted approach to sustainability and socially responsible energy planning. What are some of the key benefits that we've discussed? Let's look at them more specifically. Reduction. LCTs play a critical role in reducing GHG emissions by replacing fossil fuel-intensive systems with cleaner and more scalable alternatives. This includes innovations in renewable energy generation, such as solar, wind, and bioenergy, as well as advanced tools for carbon capture and efficiency improvements in industrial processes. By adopting these solutions, organizations and communities can make meaningful contributions to lowering global GHG levels and mitigating climate change. Long-term cost savings are another key benefit. While the initial investments in LCTs can be substantial, these solutions often generate long-term cost savings. Reduced energy consumption, higher operational efficiency, and lower maintenance requirements contribute to lowering operational costs over time. Additionally, carbon pricing mechanisms and regulatory policy increasingly create a financial incentive to shift away from fossil fuels, further enhancing the economic case for adoption. Pardon me. Finally, another key benefit to look at is air quality. Beyond environmental and financial benefits, transitions to clean energy technologies also improve air quality by reducing the release of harmful pollutants associated with traditional energy sources. Communities experience direct health benefits, including lower rates of respiratory illness and other pollution-related conditions. These combined environmental, economical, and social advantages make LCTs a compelling choice for sustainable development strategies. Some further benefits may also include energy security as a critical consideration for both national and local energy planning. By diversifying energy sources and increasing the share of renewables, countries can reduce reliance on finite fossil fuels that are often subject to volatile markets and geopolitical risks. This diversification strengthens resilience, ensuring more stable and reliable access to energy, even in times of global uncertainty. Job creation is another key impact that can be driven by LCTs. There are significant economic benefits through job creation and growth in the green economy. Sectors such as renewable energy, clean construction, sustainable technology are generating hundreds of thousands of new jobs across the world, often outpacing losses in traditional fossil fuel industries. This growth supports local economies, fosters innovation, and drives long-term employment opportunities with skills that are increasingly in demand. Energy efficiency, another key benefit here. So in addition to modern solutions that improve overall efficiency, innovations such as LED lighting, smart grid systems, and advanced energy management tools not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also optimize energy use and minimize waste. By implementing these technologies, organizations and communities can achieve both environmental and operational benefits, contributing to a more sustainable and resilient energy future. So what are the different types of LCTs? So in this section, we'll explore the low carbon and no carbon emission technologies, which are central to achieving a sustainable energy transition. These technologies focus on reducing or eliminating greenhouse gas emissions across the energy life cycle, from production to consumption, while supporting economic and environmental goals. No carbon emission technologies typically generate energy from clean or renewable sources, such as solar, wind, hydro, or geothermal. By relying on these sources instead of fossil fuels, they produce electricity with little or no associated carbon emissions, directly contributing to climate mitigation. Low carbon technologies, on the other hand, focus on improving efficiency across energy systems. These include innovations in the energy production, transmission, and consumption that minimize waste and reduce emissions even when some fossil fuels are still part of the mix. Together, these approaches, removing carbon emissions and improving efficiency, form a comprehensive strategy to transition toward a cleaner, more resilient energy system. So, no carbon emission technologies are designed to produce or use energy without generating GHG emissions. These technologies can broadly categorized in two areas: energy generation and energy efficiency. These first include technologies that generate electricity without producing emissions. Renewable energy sources that fall into this category, as we've stated, but as does nuclear energy, which we didn't mention before. By producing electricity without carbon emissions, these technologies are central to reducing the overall levels of gas. The second category involves technologies that improve energy efficiency in systems or applications not directly tied to energy productions. So examples include building efficiency upgrades, waste heat recovery, systems improved building insulation, energy storage solutions, and electric vehicles. These technologies reduce energy demand and minimize emissions during use, contributing to both environmental and economic benefits. Together, these no-carbon technologies provide practical solutions to achieving low-carbon sustainable systems. Low-carbon emission technologies reduce GHGs compared to traditional systems. These technologies can be divided into two key categories, similar to the ones before: energy generation and energy efficiency. In the energy generation, low-carbon technologies produce electricity or fuel with lower emissions than conventional methods, and some examples might be fuel shifts from higher carbon fuels to cleaner alternatives, fuel cells, biomass and biofuel production, and gas recovery from landfills. These solutions provide practical ways to reduce emissions. The second category focuses on improvement. This includes technologies like hybrid engines, low energy lighting, optimized power supply circuitry, and improved combustion efficiency. By lowering emissions during use, these innovations support both environmental and operational benefits, as discussed. Removing carbon dioxide technologies, much discussed even in the latest government budget. These technologies actively capture and remove carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. These technologies are an essential complement to low and no carbon solutions, helping to offset emissions that cannot be fully eliminated through cleaner energy generation alone. In the energy generation category, certain technologies capture greenhouse gases during the production of energy. Examples include algae-based energy systems and carbon negative power generation, which produce energy while simultaneously sequestering carbon. For energy efficiency and non-energy applications, carbon removal technologies that capture GHG gases broadly, like the Pathways project that was discussed and is being discussed. Examples include carbon capture and storage systems, biomass construction, retrofitting gas systems with CCS, and land-based strategies such as forest management, tillage, and residue management. Together, these methods offer practical solutions for reducing net emissions, supporting climate mitigation goals, and complementing the broader low-carbon strategies. So how do our emissions look per sector? In 2023, the oil and gas sector and transportation sector were the largest greenhouse gas emitters in Canada, accounting for 30% and 23% of total emissions, respectively. From 2022 to 2023, a limited increase in emissions was observed for the transport, heavy industry, and waste and other sectors, while emissions decreased for oil and gas, buildings, electricity, agriculture. From 1990, though, more broadly to 2023, an increase in emissions was observed in the oil and gas industry, almost a 77% increase. In transportation, 33%, buildings, 15%, and agricultural sectors, plus 37%. A decrease in emissions was observed in electricity, minus 48%, heavy industry, minus 19%, and waste and other, minus 13%. This slide ultimately provides an overview and a breakdown of what we just discussed, and helps understand really what some of the drivers are of these emissions. Some of these increases are tied to things like population growth. Other are tied to policy changes. You look at things like waste, with a lot of municipalities doing a lot of work at diverting organic waste from landfill. That was, again, looking at the social and economic benefits. There was a social nuisance and odors that would generally come out of landfills, and then the environmental aspect was the emissions, the methane from the anaerobic digestion. And so ultimately, we can see that some policy decisions can sway and change, even with population growth, which would assume a larger impact of emissions from waste. A focus on some of the key emissions could be very useful. And looking at even current sort of politics and policies that have been proposed, for the oil and gas industry, it's really, methane recovery would be a huge policy change that could help support decarbonization, as sort of an example. So let's talk about oil and gas. In 2023, oil and gas sector produced about 208 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent, about 30%, and it was the largest emitter. Federal policy focuses on a 75% reduction in methane emissions from the oil and gas sector, as we discussed. The reduction requirement is simulated as a regulatory requirement, demanding increased abatement actions and technologies for surface case vent flows and venting, such as increased monitoring, flaring, and well reworking in the upstream oil and gas sector. The sector is adopting lower emitting fuels such as electrification and renewable natural gas through natural gas, though natural gas remains the primary energy source for production for operations tied to production. This is mainly due to, if you look at natural gas production or bituminous sands in the oil sands up in Alberta, require a lot of energy, a lot of hot water, a lot of pressure. And so, if we were able to electrify some of them, there would definitely be a decrease in emissions from the sector. The oil and gas sector remains Canada's largest greenhouse gas emitter. It accounts for nearly 30%. A significant portion of this is anticipated, of these anticipated emission reductions are expected to come from carbon capture and storage. The carbon capture and storage is projected to capture around 27 megatons of carbon dioxide per year by 2050. So we'll see if the pilot projects like the Pathways will get off the ground. Federal policy is driving that, like we discussed, especially for those of you who work in Alberta. The tier system is a quite comprehensive greenhouse gas accounting system that ushers that in. So alongside with these two sort of factors, the sector is increasingly exploring lower emitting fuel alternatives like we discussed, because there is a benefit on an economic perspective. So this slide focuses on emission reductions in the transportation sector, which is Canada's second largest greenhouse gas emitter. In 2023, it accounted for 156 megatons at about 22.6% of the total. So under the federal emission reduction plan, the ERP, transportation emissions are projected to decline by 128 megatons from 2020 to 2050, making up roughly 54% of the total projected emission reductions across all sectors. The primary drivers of these reductions are a shift towards zero-emission vehicles. We did see the IZEV benefits come down, but that was a big policy driving adoption of electric vehicles, including the zero-emission vehicles, sort of a broader bucket, which include electric and hydrogen. But in the lower carbon reduction sort of technologies, you would also see hybrid vehicles that were included, in fact, in that policy, the IZEV policy. Policy measures supporting this transition include sales targets, 60% by 2030, 100% by 2035, obviously due to change, possibly given the political circumstance, tariffs and whatnot, but we'll see how those policies will evolve in the next few months. along with the financial incentives that hopefully will come back once we get a better understanding. Despite these efforts, the petroleum-based fuels are expected still to account for almost 50% of the sector's energy consumption by 2050. This underscores the importance of sustainable policy support, infrastructure investments, and continual technological adoption to accelerate the shift away from fossil fuels in the transportation sector. Buildings in, pardon me. The slide focuses on building sectors. On the building sector, pardon me. In 2023, it accounted for about 82.7 megatons of CO2 equivalent, or approximately 12% of Canada's total GHG emissions, making it the third largest emitter. Emissions are projected to decrease from 64 megatons in 2020 to 57. This represents a very limited progress compared to reductions in other sectors, highlighting challenges of building decarbonization. And this is, I'll add some context. This is, in part, the reduction is going to be synergic with the greening of our grid and the adoption of, the increased adoption of systems like heat pumps. Part of the difficulty in the decarbonization is the embodied energy of buildings. And so it's all the emissions that are associated with cement production, steel production, insulation, like XPS, aluminum for curtain walls and window walls. Some of these will take or could be a little bit more difficult to decarbonize over the scenario that we're looking at to 2050. So several strategies are still being implemented to reduce emissions from buildings. Efficient building shells and upgraded heating technologies are a key focus, supported by over $3.7 billion in federal funding through the budget in 21 and 22. We'll see updates to this as they roll out with the current budget. These investments aim to improve energy efficiency in residential and community buildings. Additional measures include the national gas emission cap in British Columbia, which will limit natural gas combustion emission in buildings and industry to 6 megatons annually starting in 2030, encouraging the adoption of electric heating and other low emission solutions. Heat pumps and electrification technologies are also critical for reducing emissions from building heat, benefiting from declining costs and improved performance. So together, these strategies illustrate a pathway for the building sector to contribute meaningfully to the national decarbonization goals. So I'll pause here and see if there are any questions from the chat. And if not, we'll take just a 5-minute break. You'll allow me to just sip my tea. I've got a little bit of a lingering cough that hasn't gone away. Are there any questions? No? Okay.
No questions.
Perfect. Then we will take just a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back in to overview some of the MRV frameworks, monitoring, reporting, and verifying frameworks, the adoption in different sectors, and then integration with national and provincial regulations. Thank you. Okay, great. Let's let everybody get resettled for a minute here, and we will continue. Okay, let's move on. So, the energy sector is the foundation of Canada's low carbon transition. It drives emission reductions across all other industries, necessarily because it is a common denominator to pretty much all of our industrial production. So the technologies that we've kind of discussed, like wind, hydro, and renewable, that do have some issues in terms of availability and scheduling, and so some of the variability that we've come to know in renewable um, can be supported by better energy systems. So BESS, your battery energy storage systems. We've seen a couple examples here in Ontario that have come up, but those will offer more planning. It will allow some of the energy producers and energy distributors to have better control over some of that renewable energy that they're producing. And another thing that is important to discuss is interprovincial energy. So an example recently that's being discussed is high voltage direct energy transfers. In countries like China, they have something like 40 different lines that travel from the northwest of the country down to the industrialized southeast. They offer obviously much lower losses and can be incredibly important when it might be windy in Alberta, but possibly rainy in Toronto. If we were able to transfer that massive energy over to areas where it's needed, that would obviously increase the efficiency, its adoption, its utilization efficiency. That would make it much more useful. So beyond renewables, though, there are things like small modular reactors that can be used to decarbonize mining activities and oil and gas activities, like we discussed earlier. Carbon capture and storage will play a role where it is difficult or almost impossible to remove the fossil fuel element, which might be the case in certain industries. Although, I think that over time we will eventually be able to get over that hump as well. Pardon me. Together, these technologies create a diversified and resilient energy mix that supports Canada's clean electricity strategy and net zero ambitions. The sector's transformation is not only technological, but also structural. So some of the things that we were talking about, like investments in smart grids, microgrids, and distributed energy systems, to be able to work better with the distributed energy generation that we are seeing across our country. The idea of a smart grid is essentially the shift of energy markets and energy distributors from a one-way system where energy is essentially top down. It's produced in nuclear facilities and hydro facilities, distributed across very high tension lines and pushed down into people's homes, to an idea of a grid that functions more as a market, where we all have solar panels on top of our houses that can both feed into the grid when there's an excess of production, and also then receive energy when obviously there is need. So these kinds of investments will ultimately lead to the sector's modernization through renewable growth, advanced nuclear, and digital solutions, ensuring a stable, sustainable, and inclusive clean energy future. Without this, it will be very difficult to decarbonize some of the other industries that we've discussed. Hence why energy is sort of the key driver of a lot of this efficiency. And you can see the difference in certain grids like Ontario, where it's highly decarbonized. The emissions associated to using electricity are incredibly low compared to other provinces or other nations. And these are benefits because, like we've discussed, we're removing some of the volatility, the price volatility from our energy production that is dependent on foreign markets and therefore geopolitics and all these these other details. And so there are knockdown effects that are very important to look at with sustainability, especially in a time where we've sort of begun questioning some of that. Countries like the U.S. questioning some of the opportunities of utilizing these technologies. So let's look at wind energy. Wind energy turbines are used to convert wind into electricity. The energy is a clean and zero emission source. It supports the national and global effort to decarbonize. It's one of the fastest growing renewable energy technologies worldwide due to its scalability and decreasing costs. In Canada, wind energy has seen substantial growth over the past 5 years. Driven by major investments that have expanded capacity. Current projections estimate that Canada's wind energy capacity will reach 19.77 gigawatts by 2025 and grow at a compound annual growth rate of about 9%, reaching 30.19 gigawatts by 2030. Scaling strategies include continued investment in large-scale projects and the implementation of supportive policies that encourage development. Despite these gains, wind energy development faces several barriers. Policy inconsistency, and you can look at the province of Alberta over the last year or two has halted a lot of wind energy projects. Economic and operational challenges. The cost of some of the larger, more efficient wind turbines can be very high, and the lead times for manufacturing and installing them can take even longer or can be quite long, especially due to the challenges of where some of these wind turbines and wind parks are essentially located. Effective community engagement and streamlined permitting processes and long-term policy stability will be critical to overcoming these obstacles and achieving projected growth in Canada's wind energy market. Solar energy. Solar energy captures the power of sunlight and transforms it into electricity through photovoltaic cells, offering a remarkably versatile solution that can range from small rooftop installation to expansive utility-scale solar farms. Its appeal lies not only in its clean, zero-emission nature, but also the flexibility it provides for meeting diverse energy needs. Across North America, solar has emerged as one of the fastest growing sources. A combination of steadily declining costs and improvements in panel efficiency have encouraged broader adoption. Looking ahead, projections suggest a significant increase in solar contribution to the electricity mix, with estimates rising from around 3% in 2020 to roughly 40% by 2035 and continuing towards 45% by 2050. Despite its rapid growth, solar energy faces certain complexities that can affect deployment. Integrating large-scale solar generation into existing electricity grids requires careful planning, and delays in permitting or inconsistent policy support can slow progress. Addressing these challenges through coordinated planning, supportive regulations, and technology solutions will be important for maintaining its trajectory. Hydroelectric power generation, as we know, harnesses the power in Ontario, we obviously use the difference in heights between the different lakes, whereas in Quebec, they have a lot of river and damming that is used. It's a foundational component of the country's clean energy supply. Provinces like British Columbia and Quebec have long led in hydro capacity, while other regions, including Alberta and Ontario, are increasing development. Canada's hydroelectric sector has expanded significantly, and it continues to play a central role. Scaling strategies often focus on creating supportive policies and the financial incentives. This is going to be true across all of these technologies, along with policy stability. But upgrading the grid infrastructure and making sure that there's community and Indigenous ownership models, I think, will be key, because in particular with hydroelectric projects, there are effects on the habitat and the land around them when we go out and dam these areas. And so it's important to make sure that those conversations are happening ahead of time to not stop the progress of these projects. Refurbishing aging infrastructure also offers an effective solution. So changing out some of the older turbines with newer and more efficient ones to increase capacity. So despite its maturity, hydroelectric power faces several challenges. The high initial capital costs and financing complexities can delay project development, while regulatory requirements and lengthy permitting add further hurdles. The climate-related risks, such as droughts, can impact generation capacity, and integrating variable renewable sources into the grid requires careful planning to balance all these objectives and incentives to sort of make sure that hydro is still included in the long-term low carbon energy solutions in the country. Battery energy and storage system, or BESS, are emerging technologies that store electricity for use when demand is high or when renewable generation fluctuates. In Canada, BESS is moving beyond pilot projects towards larger scale deployments, reflecting growing recognition of its role in supporting a reliable, low carbon electricity system. Scaling up battery storage requires supportive policies and regulatory frameworks that enable broad adoption and integration into the electricity grid. Again, because of the structure of the way that our electricity grids, for example, here in Ontario, we have many small local distributors. It's important to have very firm regulatory frameworks to allow them to go out and essentially spend and project and look at these projects over a longer term horizon that will guarantee and assure them the funds that they, pardon me, require to actually launch these projects. Oh, my apologies. Skip forward. So as a result, over time, BESS is so. Pardon me. So just to go back, BESS is vital for integrating variable renewables like wind and solar. It affords us to store them when we don't need them and deploy them when we do. Canada is moving away from these initial projects, and we're really now focused on grid scale implementation, which will be a very important piece of this of the greening of the grid, which obviously has synergic effects across all industries, because inevitably whatever electricity you use is greener, and that benefits ultimately the global emissions of the organization. So all the technologies that we discussed will be needed to achieve the necessary deep cuts in global emissions by 2030. The policies that can drive the deployment are already proven as well. We know that they work. Reaching net zero by 2050 requires rapid deployment of available technologies as well as widespread use of them that we haven't yet seen within the market. So there are new technologies coming that will help the adoption and the scaling of them. The biggest innovation opportunities concern advanced batteries, hydrogen electrolyzers, and direct energy capture and storage. These are different systems for storing that energy, and we've seen examples, I believe, in Norway or Sweden, where they're actually using thermal energy as the storage. So building large tanks of material that can be heated to a certain temperature, perfectly insulated, that can maintain that heat, and then redeploy it into a steam cycle or teleheating to heat a neighborhood. So essentially the production of industrial grade heat. So all these different solutions, I think, will really be important. So we talked about decarbonizing long-term. So these strategic investments, policy support, collaboration across sectors will be essential to bring these innovations to market and integrate them effectively into the broader landscape. So this chart highlights the urgent need for accelerating clean energy innovation to meet global climate goals. It underscores that while governments have made progress, public R&D investments remain insufficient and unevenly distributed. With critical technologies like electrification, hydrogen, bioenergy, and carbon capture and storage receiving only about 1/3 of the funding given to more established solutions like renewable and energy efficiency. To close this gap, countries must not only increase R&D spending, but also restructure funding priorities to target emerging technologies that can decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors. The data also emphasizes the importance of demonstration of deployment. They are essential to move innovations from the lab to real-world applications. Globally, around 90 billion in public funding is needed before 2030 to complete a full portfolio of demonstration projects, yet only about 25 billion is currently allocated. This shortfall risks delaying critical progress. By scaling up investments, governments can leverage private capital, lower technology costs through learning and deployment, and unlock new commercial and employment opportunities, driving both economic growth and the global transition to net zero. So let's look at the transportation sector now. The transportation sector plays a pivotal role in achieving Canada's net zero goals, as it remains one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. This section explores how transitioning to low carbon and zero emission transportation can drastically cut emissions while improving mobility, air quality, and energy security. Key strategies, as we well know, electrifying passenger cars, transit vehicles, and delivery trucks, while expanding EV charging networks across both urban and rural regions to ensure equitable access, the energy grid being a fundamental component of being able to achieve this. At the same time, scaling up clean fuels such as green hydrogen and renewable diesel will be crucial for decarbonizing heavy-duty transport in sectors where electrification is, at this point, less practical. Finally, sustainable transportation planning must also prioritize rail and public transit expansion, as well as non-motorized modes like cycling and walking, which contributes not only to emission reductions, but also to a healthier and more connected communities. Together, these measures will define how Canada reshapes its mobility systems for a cleaner, more resilient future. So let's look at them a little bit more in depth. Low carbon transportation infrastructure is a component of Canada's strategy to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. This type of infrastructure encompasses a range of initiatives designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transport sector, including electric vehicle charging networks, transit-oriented development, and dedicated cycling lanes. By enabling cleaner modes of travel, the investments help shift transportation away from fossil fuels while promoting more sustainable mobility options. Scaling such infrastructure effectively requires integrated community energy solutions that connect local transit, electric vehicle networks, and broader urban planning efforts. These approaches ensure that low carbon infrastructure is not implemented in isolation, but as part of a coordinated system that maximizes environmental and social benefits. Supportive infrastructure such as sustainable transit networks, the EV charging stations, net zero vehicle lanes is critical for encouraging adoption and maintaining momentum towards low carbon transport systems. However, there are barriers to widespread deployment. Long-term funding is essential to sustain these projects. We've seen the IZEV incentive dried up in March of this year. Successful implementation requires coordination amongst multiple stakeholders, including municipal, provincial, and federal agencies, as well as private partners. The legislation meant to implement, a certain percentage of electric vehicle sales helps move some of those things along. That may be in doubt or is definitely getting relooked at. So some of these things will form a little bit of a drag on the industry and on its capacity to keep investing. Addressing these challenges is crucial to ensuring that investments in low carbon transportation infrastructure deliver measurable emission reductions and support Canada's broader climate objective. So EVs are essentially, exactly what they're described to be. They have very limited tailpipe emissions. They essentially the emissions tied to the emissions produced by the grid where you're charging your car. While something that is not often talked about, they do have higher embodied carbon emissions than the normal ICE car. In other words, the batteries, the heavier chassis, on average, an EV is about double the weight of its equivalent ICE, internal combustion engine car. So there are some pitfalls there. The batteries are definitely something that we need to obviously get better at, but the tailpipe emissions are zero, obviously. So they are scaling or were scaling relatively quickly. We have seen a slowdown in the market over the course of the last year or so. And part of that is due to incentives that are ending, and part of that is due to infrastructure that is lacking. So the adoption really depends on the circumstance in which you are in. There are definitely countries that have a much higher adoption rate, but their infrastructure meets the demand and requirements of the electric vehicle users. And so we see that with electric vehicles, There are elements of both social, sort of social, getting used to, not having the same flexibility or freedom that their car transported before, and making sure that policies are trying to close that gap. So as tech advances, EVs are becoming more accessible and more mainstream. Hopefully costs will come down. So these vehicles, are incredibly important at decarbonizing this energy source, and hopefully the new policies and initiatives such as the ultra low emission zones can provide a daily or a daily charge for high emission vehicles driving across London have seen great success in encouraging EV adoption. The rate of a ULEZ compliant vehicle surged from 61% in central London to 97% in 2024. So in very few years. So there are localized policies that need to meet the demand and also need to provide the infrastructure to be able to adopt those vehicles more broadly and help that scaling happen. So now let's look at the manufacturing and industrial sector. It is one of the most challenging areas to decarbonize, given its reliance on high temperature processes and fossil fuel heat. This section focuses on how industries like cement, steel, and chemicals are leading the way through carbon capture, utilization, and storage projects that target process-related emissions directly at the source. Pardon me. Electrification is also emerging as a key strategy, replacing fossil fuel boilers with kilns and electric alternatives wherever technically and economically feasible. However, deep decarbonization in this sector requires a blend of innovation, investment, and infrastructure, as not all industrial processes can easily shift away from carbon-intensive fuels. In parallel, digital technologies such as artificial intelligence, sensors, and the Internet of Things more broadly are transforming manufacturing efficiency. These tools allow for real-time monitoring, predictive maintenance, and optimized energy use, reducing waste and operational emissions. Together, these advancements signal a shift towards smart, low-carbon manufacturing, where innovation and efficiency go hand in hand with sustainability. So let's look at fuel cell combined with hydrogen and oxygen. Let's take a step back. Let's look at fuel cells more broadly. Fuel cells work by combining hydrogen and oxygen to produce water, and in that process release electrons that can, feed an electric circuit. So hydrogen can power vehicles, heat buildings, and contribute to decarbonizing heavy industry. Canada's hydrogen strategy focuses on promoting low-carbon hydrogen production and its integration into the energy system. Scaling strategies include establishing regulatory frameworks and supporting initiatives that blend hydrogen with natural gas, helping to create a market demand and stimulate investment in infrastructure and technology. These measures are intended to accelerate adoption and ensuring safety and efficiency standards that are met. We currently blend hydrogen and natural gas, but we are limited in the percentage that we're able to blend, and this is due to the risk that hydrogen diffuses in the steel. One of the big problems of transporting blue hydrogen, which comes from oil and gas production, to places like Ontario where we have industrial demand for hydrogen. If you think of green steel works with an electric arc furnace that requires hydrogen to reach the temperatures that are needed to produce the steel alloy. And so the issue, though, in transporting hydrogen is that you require stainless steel tubing that is dense enough to be able to handle the hydrogen throughout the transportation. So we're limited in the amount of hydrogen we can transport. So despite this, we see the barriers. There are high costs for end users. There is not yet a distribution grid that is able to sort of transport to distribute it to the same granular level as natural gas, plus the complications of transporting hydrogen and the increased cost of having to use stainless steel compared to normal steel are some of the barriers that are afflicting this industry. Carbon capture and storage. Carbon capture and storage is a technology designed to literally suck carbon CO2 and other chemicals from large point sources such as power plants, industrial facilities before it enters the atmosphere. The Pathways project is literally taking out of the air, and so there's sort of two applications, one sort of direct at source and one that's just trying to sort of pull it out of the air and clean it. Captured CO2 can either be permanently stored in geological formations, such as depleted oil and gas reservoirs or saline aquifers, or used in commercial applications such as concrete, synthetic fuels, and carbonated beverages. Carbon capture and storage combines elements of carbon capture, transportation via pipeline, ships, rail, or trucks, and utilization and storage, forming a comprehensive approach to reducing industrial emissions. It plays a particularly critical role in decarbonizing hard-to-abate sectors, including cement, steel, and oil and gas. Canada's emerged as a global leader in this field with operational projects such as Quest and the initiatives under the Pathway Alliance, demonstrating both feasibility and impact of the technology. Internationally, projects like Norway's Northern Lights illustrate the potential for large-scale geological storage of millions of tons of CO2, highlighting the global importance of carbon capture and storage. Scaling requires strategic support. Financial incentives and tax credits can help, but the incredibly high upfront capital costs, for the infrastructure and the operational costs of running the plant are very high, and they do not currently have an incentive that allows them to sort of be profitable, if you will. And that's part of the sustainable competitiveness strategy that Kearney is trying to adopt, is looking to create an offset market where these projects can essentially sell offsets from the CO2 that they're capturing from the air. In other words, being able to create a cash flow that supports essentially the building of these very large industrial facilities. So public-private partnerships can also provide a mechanism to share financial and technical risks, but despite these opportunities, barriers remain, including high costs, regulatory and permitting complexity, and public perception and concerns. So let's look at bioenergy quickly. Bioenergy and carbon capture and storage is an innovative approach that combines renewable energy generation with active removal of CO2 from the atmosphere by using biomass, such as dedicated energy crops, agricultural residue, or wood, which naturally absorbs CO2 as they grow. BECCS systems generate energy while capturing and permanently storing the carbon released during conversion processes. This dual function addresses both climate mitigation and energy production. Facilities typically include components similar to conventional power plants, combustion chambers, and gasification units paired with carbon capture equipment that separates CO2 from exhausted gases. Carbon capture is then compressed and transported via long storage for storage in geological formations. This approach positions it as a key technology in this process. Green steel that we were discussing just earlier represents a transformative approach to reducing the carbon footprint of the steel industry. For everybody's reference, steel is obviously produced in large ovens. They used to use coke, which is highly emitting. It also uses limestone as a chemical separator in the initial foundry process, which also naturally emits CO2. As of January 2023, steelmakers with net zero targets accounted for roughly 38% of global crude steel capacity, signaling a growing commitment to decarbonization by the industry. The most promising pathway is a hydrogen-based steelmaking, specifically hydrogen direct reduction, which uses 100% green hydrogen instead of conventional natural gas to produce steel with minimal emissions. But again, like with many of these technologies, it involves investing in low carbon and expanding hydrogen so that it can be used by these industrial applications. Pilot projects and early commercial initiatives are underway, combining hydrogen-based production with electrification to explore pathways for reducing emissions at scale. But like many of these other projects, there are high initial cost. There's uncertainty in some of the processes, not this one in particular, but in general, that create barriers for industry adoption. And so it's really important, again, policy and initiatives from governments to support the adoption and the piloting of these technologies in order for them to be able to work out the kinks and show that they are economically feasible and therefore can be adopted at scale is going to be key for these technologies to really get off the drawing board. The agricultural sector. So the agricultural sector is another key component to Canada's low carbon transition, both a source of emissions and potential carbon sink. Two of the most impactful strategies driving this transformation are 4R nutrient stewardship and precision agriculture. The 4R framework, using the right source, right rate, right time, and right place for fertilizer, helps farmers reduce nitrous oxide emissions, one of the most potent greenhouse gases, while maintaining or even improving crop yields. Meanwhile, precision agricultural technologies, including GPS-guided equipment, drones, sensors, and AI-based analytics allow farmers to make data-driven decisions that optimize water, fertilizer, and pesticide use. These innovations not only cut emissions and resource waste, but also enhance productivity and soil health. So some greater details on precision agricultural technologies and how they're transforming crops are grown. Helping farmers optimize inputs such as water, fertilizer, and pesticides while minimizing environmental impact. Tools like GPS-guided tractors, AI-enabled soil sensors, and data analytics allow farmers to increase productivity and reduce greenhouse gases by applying inputs more efficiently and precisely. Again, we're looking to create mechanisms within the government, within policies that support the adoption of these technologies. In other words, hopefully creating a benefit to the farmers for adopting them outside of the increased and more detailed sort of farm management capacities that they will have. Tillage and residue management are key practices in this field as well. So conservation tillage practices include reduced tillage or no-till methods, minimizing soil disturbance, helping to preserve soil structure, to enhance organic matter, improve water retention, and increase resilience to drought. These practices not only reduce emissions, but also contribute to long-term productivity and sustainability of farmland. The 4R's stewardship framework, the right source, right rate, right time, and right place, is the underlying principle of why these technologies are effective. And these provide ultimately a structured approach to managing fertilizer use efficiently. By following these principles, farmers can reduce emissions associated with fertilizer application while maintaining crop yields, supporting both productivity and environmental sustainability. So, what is our current trajectory here in Canada? Under the current emission reduction plan scenario, Canada is making meaningful progress towards reducing its greenhouse gas emissions, with projections showing a 38% decline below 2005 levels by 2050. However, even with these measures, emissions would still exceed legislated net zero target by approximately 400 megatons per year, underscoring the need for continued action. The ERP scenario highlights the sectors contributing most to reductions: electricity generation, benefits from expanded renewables and carbon capture technology. Transportation accounts for roughly 54% of the projected declines due to electrification and alternative fuels. And the oil and gas sector sees a 37% reduction through emission caps and methane mitigation measures. In contrast, a rollback of policies would produce only a 6% reduction, illustrating the significant consequences of weakened climate action. I'll stop here. We've got just a few more slides. Is there a question? I see somebody in the chat. I don't know if there is. The question is on bioplastics, and I 100% agree. Obviously, as the use of oil and gas in general as a fuel comes down, the Materials that are used to produce plastics that are a byproduct of that process will hopefully be less in the market and won't be as cheap, and it'll be more competitive to use bioplastics. And hopefully, in general, bioplastics will start becoming more efficient and more cost effective as well. But that is a great point. We are really looking for, in general, when we look at if bioplastics end up in a landfill, they can have the same problem ultimately as organic waste. It depends on how they're manufactured, but ideally you can compost them, right? And so we know that with aerobic composting practices, we can reduce methane emissions by quite a bit. So what we're looking for, though, just to sort of close that, is circularity. We want to be able to produce products that don't require constant extraction of raw materials, that are efficient to produce on an operational perspective, and that can be reintroduced into that cycle, if not entirely, but to a smaller portion. If they're not reintroduced directly into that cycle, something like a bioplastic that can be composted, well, that composting can then go back to serve as fertilizer or whatever end use they might have for it, right? So there is a series of different sort of applications or ways that we can view that circularity. So let's see if there's another question here. Thank you. Okay, fantastic. I will continue. We've just got a couple more slides, and then we'll open the floor to a little bit of a conversation, and then we'll see from there. So in this slide, we're going to focus on 5 key decarbonization pathways that can each deliver something like 50 megatons of emission reductions by 2050, with the remainder of Canada's net zero targets achieved through land use and forestry carbon removals. The high electrification pathway focuses on expanding electricity use in heating, transportation, and industrial processes, essentially replacing direct fossil fuel combustion with clean power. When this electrification is paired primarily with renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, and hydro, the pathway achieves even deeper decarbonization and enhances energy resiliency. The bioenergy pathway leverages sustainable biomass and waste to energy systems to generate power or fuel while capturing and reusing emissions. Hydrogen, both green and blue, plays a major role in decarbonizing heavy industry, freight, and other hard-to-electrify sectors. And finally, fossil with CCUS recognizes that some fossil fuel use may persist, but large-scale deployment of carbon capture, utilization, and storage can offset its impact. Together, these pathways form a balanced and flexible approach to achieving net zero energy system by mid-century. There is a stark requirement for business investors to play a critical role in the development and deployment of LCT technologies by providing financing needed to implement sustainable solutions at scale. Currently, the business sector contributes the largest share of investment in low-carbon technologies, highlighting its central role in driving innovation and adoption. Sustaining this investment structure requires complementary support from government policies and programs, as well as engagement from civil society, which together help de-risk investments, encourage market confidence, and ensure that financing flows continue to support the transition to a low-carbon economy. And I would add here, as well, as we saw, a lot of the private investment is going into renewable energy, solar and wind. It is important that the government prioritize other forms of decarbonization technologies like we've seen, and that can be everything from regulations on 100% diversion of organic waste if we're looking at waste, or no-tilling practices becoming more obligatory, et cetera, et cetera. The Clean Technology Investment Tax Credit, or the CTITC, is a federal measure designed to encourage the adoption of clean technologies in Canada. It provides a renewable tax credit equal to 30% of the capital cost of eligible clean technology property and applies to investments made between March 2023 and December 2034. Eligible equipment include clean electricity generation systems such as solar, wind, energy storage and technologies, and zero-emission industrial vehicles. The primary purpose of these ITC credits is to lower investment barriers and accelerate the scaling of clean technology adoption. By reducing the upfront capital costs, the program makes it more financially feasible for businesses to invest in sustainable technologies, helping Canada meet its low carbon net zero objectives. It is important to note that the federal government has proposed certain changes to provisions that may take effect retroactively. Businesses should stay informed about these updates to fully understand how to utilize this technology, utilize this tax credit, pardon me. So industrial carbon pricing and clean innovations across Canada. The Decarbonization Incentive Program, funded through proceeds from the federal output-based pricing system, demonstrates how industrial carbon pricing can drive clean innovation across Canada. By returning funds to the provinces where carbon pricing revenues are collected, the program supports projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve energy efficiency, and foster the adoption of clean technologies. To date, the program has invested nearly 150 million in 38 clean technology projects, with a total of over 874 million directed towards 53 projects nationwide, contributing to an estimated reduction of 544,000 tons of emissions by 2030 in the participating provinces. The DIP's focus on industry-led initiatives help position Canadian businesses as leaders in clean technology while simultaneously promoting environmental stewardship and job creation. By funding projects that increase efficiency and reduce emissions, the program encourages companies to innovate and adopt low-carbon solutions. Aligning with Canada's broader climate objectives, between 2005 and 2023, such incentives contributed to 34% reduction in emission intensity of the economy, highlighting the effectiveness of combining market mechanisms with targeted investments. Beyond emission reductions, the DAP enhances the global competitiveness of Canadian industries, supports the adoption of clean technology, and helps companies modernize operations to reduce energy costs and access emerging green markets. By integrating carbon pricing with strategic investments, the DIP exemplifies how policy instruments can simultaneously drive decarbonization, economic growth, and technological innovation. We saw that the ITCs were expanded in the budget the other day, and now are, like we've kind of discussed, are focused on those local distributors of electricity. So, it very much falls in line with what we've been talking about today. So the Decarbonization Incentive Program has contributed to a series of projects. The Ontario Roseburg Forest Project. The project installed new biomass furnaces and waste fiber product handling system equipment to offset the large proportion of gas that was used by using more rejected fibers from the process. The Tundra Oil and Gas in Manitoba completed 7 projects under the program that will see various fuel switching and carbon management activities take place at the facility. Sorry, I forgot to mention the first project, 26,000 projected by 2030 tons of CO2e. The Manitoba project will see 61,000 tons of CO2 reductions. In Ontario, Lafarge is working to upgrade an existing low-carbon fuel system to add dosing equipment and increase storage capacity that will provide a significant increase in feed rate capacity, resulting in a significant decrease in carbon pollution, expected to reduce 34,000 tons of CO2e by 2030. And the last one is Ferrero, for those of you who love Kinder Bueno and Nutella. The project will decarbonize and modernize Ferrero's energy profile and thermal heating systems through fuel switching and energy efficiency measures. This too will produce something like 16,000 tons of reductions by 2030. So that is the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for coming and listening in. If you have any questions, please feel free to add them in the chat. Otherwise, I will hand it back to Haley.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, we'll give a couple minutes for people to put any questions that they may have in the chat.
My apologies, my connection dropped.
We have one question in the chat, Andrew. How can non-engineer professionals get involved in the implementation of these technologies?
I think, whilst the engineering portion is obviously a side of this whole discussion, I think there's really a lot of need for good professionals that are getting inside of businesses and that are doing the work to really look at how these technologies can impact their business. And what I mean by that in a very practical sense is, if there is an opportunity, if you work for a company that can be the most desperately different company that exists in Canada, but ultimately every company uses electricity, and so looking at how is your province incentivizing the adoption of that technology and getting involved and seeing if your company can adopt it. In more broadly, within the actual companies that are working in the space to get their technology out there, they as well are looking for a lot of, smart young professionals that understand the technical or can understand a piece of the technical side, but maybe are working to, how can I say, that are working more so on the side of promoting the technology, getting it out in front of customers, looking at specific use cases where maybe the industry really just hasn't gotten there yet, and there can be a large benefit. So I really think that with this new government and with this new reframing of sustainability as a competitive advantage, I think that really opens it up to people looking at it from a business perspective and not just an engineering perspective. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank
Um,
you.
with regards to the fossil fuel industry, whilst I am a firm believer and hoper that by 2050, we won't be using it. I fear that we will, and that might be more of an economical consideration, just given the amount of money that is tied up to fossil fuels. And so, and you can see some of the discussion that we're having in our country as well, where, in the midst of all of this, we're building new pipelines. And so realistically, I think we do in the short term, I think need to be smart. If we can export natural gas, for example, to country that is currently using coal, and we can substitute that coal, that's a great first step. And it definitely does bring with it some advantages environmentally. I just don't know, how that will sort of play out over the long term. I think a lot of questions are still up. We'll see how carbon capture functions as well. If it's as good as people think it is, I don't know. There's a lot of questions around that as well. I think we're still in a wait and see phase. Enhanced weathering and agricultural lands for carbon dioxide removal. Um, I don't know what you mean by enhanced weathering exactly. Are you talking about like no-till practices? Um, so anyway, I'll pause on the no-till part, but yes, there are definitely some agricultural practices. My colleague Catherine, who probably would have been better suited to answer that question, um, has worked on no-till projects before and looking at the carbon offsets that are created from the no-till. So there's actually a benefit to farmers if we could get this offset system to work federally and hopefully create more liquid offsets that could be bought and sold, farmers could have an economic incentive from reducing those practices. And so, if in part, obviously there's a saving in cost because you don't have to go out and till the land. There could also be an economic benefit from an offset that's created because the land isn't releasing as much methane in those cans. Enhanced rock. Yes, I don't know much about enhanced rock weathering. Sorry, outside of what I mentioned. Okay. Well, I suppose we'll wrap it up here if there are no other questions. Please feel free to reach out, LinkedIn, or my email that I think Eco Canada may have shared. Um, we're happy to discuss any of these topics. At AET, we work a lot with SMEs trying to figure out square that circle. So it's part of our sort of mission statement. So
Thanks.
exactly, yeah. Sorry, one last question just to sort of focus on some of the low carbon technology that SMEs can adopt. Like we said, solar panels, reducing electricity consumption, adoption of sort of electrifying some of your processes, in particular heating and heating, cooling, obviously we already do, but there are also industrial processes that can be electrified. Um, you know, Generally, what we and some of the companies that we work with, good policy, good governance policies can help adoption of LCTs even more broadly throughout the company. At AT, we have internal policies that actually have grants associated to employees purchasing electric or hybrid cars. And so, there's a lot of power that SMEs have to drive change. It really is maybe about being a little creative. So I don't know if that answers the question. Haley, back to you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you for your great presentation and for taking the time to answer those questions at the end here. And thank you, everyone, for coming today. Check out the Eco Canada events calendar to see more events similar that we have coming up. And enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Bye-bye.